Okay, so we're going to take all the transformations you've learned now and apply a combination of all those transformations to a given graph or a given function or all that other good stuff. Okay, so the general form of a function that involves all the transformations you have applied in the past is of the form y minus k is equal to a times f of square brackets b times x minus h brackets and close those square brackets. Okay, so there is the general form that represents all the transformations you've done so far. And to do a little bit of review here, the first thing that we went through was your k value. Remember that k value caused a vertical translation, so up or down. And then the second thing we looked at was your h value, and that was your horizontal translations, and that was taking a graph and moving it left or right. And then we went into stretches. The first stretch we went through was this a value, and that caused a vertical stretch, so making your graph look a little narrow, wider, expanded or compressed, okay? And then the last stretch we went through was the horizontal stretch. Now that looked a lot like your vertical stretches, but with a horizontal stretch, all your x coordinates are affected and all your y coordinates stayed the same. And then the other type of transformation we looked at were your reflections, and your reflections all came from your a and b value. When your a value, and I'll write this down here, when your a value was less than 0, we had a vertical reflection. So it was being reflected in the x-axis. And then when your b value was less than 0, we had a horizontal reflection. So that was taking your graph and reflecting it in the y-axis. So there are all your transformations, okay? And so what does that mean in terms of our points on the original graph? Well, all your points, x, y, on the original graph will now become, okay? So looking at our x-coordinate first, what you want to take a look at, what affects the x-coordinate? Well, the transformations that affect the x-coordinates are your horizontal stretch, your horizontal reflection, and your horizontal translation. So remember, let's go back to the horizontal stretch here. What happened to your x values when you applied a horizontal stretch? Well, you divided all your x values by whatever the b value was, okay? And then, of course, if your b value was less than 0, then we had a horizontal reflection, okay? But what do we have to do to apply the horizontal translation? Well, to apply the horizontal translation, we added our h value. Okay, so that caused our x-coordinates to move left or right. So that is what happens to our x-coordinates under a combination of transformations. Now let's take a look at what happened to our y values. Okay, so what affected our y values? What transformations did? Well, we had a vertical stretch, we had a vertical reflection, and we had a vertical translation. Those are the transformations that affected only your y values, okay? So looking at the vertical stretch, how did that affect your y values? Well, your a value was your vertical stretch factor. So all your y values were multiplied by your a value, okay? And then, of course, if your a value was less than 0, but then we had a vertical reflection in the x-axis. And then finally, what happened to all your y values when you applied a vertical translation? Well, all your all your y values were added to whatever your k value was. So this little mini formula that I have here is so useful when you're trying to figure out where your points are going when you have a combination of transformations. So keep that in mind when you're applying any type of transformation to a given graph. You also might be asking, what's the order of our transformations? Well, go back to this concept right here, bed mass, okay? What comes first in terms of our operations? Well, our division and our multiplication always comes before our addition and subtraction. So going back to the mini formula up here, we have to apply the division and the multiplication before you add your h and you add your k value. So what does that mean in terms of our transformations? That means you have to apply your stretches and your reflections first. The third and last transformation you will be performing are any sort of transformations. So if you can also keep this in mind when it comes to applying your transformations, SRT, stretches first, reflections second, translations very last. And I'm going to guarantee you, this order in which the transformations are performed is really, really, really important. Do not screw up the order. SRT, okay? So keeping that in mind here, what we're going to do next is we are going to apply a combination of transformations to a given graph, and that is going to be my next lesson.